So employment is a main concern of students. So how would you secure a competitive job market, both in Bath and nationwide?
Absolutely. You've all probably seen the recent jobs figures. Unemployment is now at the lowest since records began, which is an incredibly encouraging opportunity. I have to admit, I first started my job in 2008, and I lingered around on minimum wage for about 18 months as a recruitment consultant in London, and it was one of the most soul-destroying parts of my life, I have to admit. For those of you who are ever interested in going into sales, just make sure you go into sales when you're not in the middle of a recession. So I hope all the politicians ended up delivering a very strong economy on that basis. But we've got a very good opportunity now for people who are graduating to go into a job of their choice. And anything that I can do in order to help you secure that is a bonus. So in Bristol, they've got the jobs fair, for example. Bath doesn't have a jobs fair. Well, it'd be quite an obvious answer to actually introduce a jobs fair in Bath so that you can see what businesses are available to you in the centre of Bath. For those of you that want to be lawyers, you've got more law firms than you can shake a stick at this city. And they're some of the best law firms anywhere in the UK. We've also got an amazing financial services district in Bath as well, and it's a growing one too. The claimant count in Bath has gone down by 60.8% since the last general election. That's an incredibly successful set of statistics that's really helping to turn around people's lives. And there are many more opportunities now available than there were certainly when I was hitting the jobs market back in 2008. So if you want me to put you in touch with any of the businesses, if you are looking at one, I simply speak to them on an almost daily basis now, so I'm happy to facilitate that with you.
Lovely. And finally, Ben, Bath students are always keen to enhance their CV and boost prospects after graduation. So how would you ensure students benefit from their degrees as much as possible and enter the job market prepared?
Absolutely. I was just wondering how many people in the Politics Society would be looking to do work experience in my office in Parliament, maybe. Joking, honestly. I'm not going to start buying votes on that one. Yeah, you're quite right. I have got a background in recruitment. I'm not going to lie about that. I know how to do a decent CV. So if anybody ever wants to send me their CV, they're more than welcome to do so. And I can give you some honest feedback, because I have seen some absolutely horrific ones. If anyone ever says to you, by the way, that you need to get your CV on 2 pages, they're simply lying. Just a little tidbit for free for you. I won't charge you on that either. But in terms of how you get the best opportunities out of what you're doing here, I think it's really important that we work well with universities, colleges. I'm a school governor at the Bath Studio School, one of the highest pupil premium rates anywhere in Bath, and we work with them on an individual one-to-one basis. And I know at the university they've got an excellent careers service as well that you guys can facilitate. That does mean we need to be looking at increased funding for career services, and it's certainly something that I'd be lobbying for if I did become the MP too. So there's a really good opportunity for you to get the best advice. Mine was appalling. I was told to go off and go into the army when I was asked, and to be frank, I'm not exactly designed for the army, I have to admit. So you've got some really good opportunities here at the university, and also we want to make sure we facilitate that going forward as well in other schools around Bath.
Lovely. Any questions on what Ben has said about university funding and the job market? If not, we will open questions to the floor. So, and if you would wait for the mics before we speak, we'll go back row in the Christmas jumper and then in the beanie cap.
That is a very fetching jumper, I must say.
I just like this jumper.
No offence, man.
Hi. In your opening statement, you mentioned in your own words, perverse and outdated electoral system.
Yes.
Does your party intend on changing that anytime soon?
My party doesn't anytime soon, no. That doesn't mean to say that I will disagree with them. I thought it was a complete missed opportunity for the Liberal Democrats to change the voting system into a more proportional representation type system. AV, I thought, was one of the worst systems anywhere in the UK. I had the great privilege of being able to represent the UK Conservative Party at a conference in Sydney. It was an International Democrats conference, and they were quite clear with us when I was out there. They said AV is the worst system possible and we want to scrap it in Australia. So I have absolutely no idea why Nick Clegg thought it was a very good idea to try and introduce AV in the UK rather. So my view would be actually you'd much better in order to retain the constituency link, because I think actually one of the fundamental principles of our democracy in the UK is the relationship between the MP and its constituents. That you look at something like they've got in London as an example, with a top-up type system, in that you end up with your constituency representative, your constituency assembly members, your constituency MPs, but then if you're underrepresented, then you end up with an additional MP or an additional assembly member topped up on your level of MPs. I think that's a much more sensible system to have introduced, and unfortunately we didn't have the opportunity to debate it. I fear, unfortunately, that sort of constitutional reform is a dead duck now, and we won't be bringing that up again, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity. English votes for English MPs is no doubt going to be something a little bit more on topic at the moment, and certainly something that all political parties will be thinking about quite considerably at the moment.
Hiya, that was actually going to be my question. But looking at one of your 6-point plans,
yes.
One of them is that you wish to boost Bath's talent by ensuring excellent local education, ensuring apprenticeships.
Yep.
By excellent local education, what do you mean?
What do I mean by
Are you
excellent education?
in favour of free schools and academies yourself?
Yes, because I'm a school governor at one. Quite simply.
Well, why, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Bath Studio School is a absolutely superb space for creative learning. It really is. It's one of the first ones anywhere in the country to have been built, and actually built under budget as well, which is very good news for everybody. The issue in Bath is that we've got amazing schools. We've got some great schools. I mean, we really do. But standards can always be improved. And I don't think it's not in anyone's interest to make sure that these schools are actually now sort of trying to outperform some of the national high achieving schools by getting them into the top 100. And I'd like to see all the schools in Bath trying to achieve that. And the Bath Studio School has looked at sort of almost flatlining standards in education in Bath and North East Somerset and said, right, okay, let's look at the model of education. Let's provide the education tailored to that particular student. So if, say, for example, you want to be a games developer and you want to be a film producer, then what they'll do is that they'll tailor an entire course package all the way around what you're wanting to achieve with your life. So there are people from the games development industry who are teaching those courses, and there are former producers from the BBC who are teaching the kids about film production in a green room. They've got their entire TV set, they've got the editing suite, and it's just an amazing facility, really designed to up standards, improve the chances of these young people as well. And at the end of it, for the 5 days a week that they're at that school, on the 5th day they go out into business and they have to work with the industry that they're wanting to work in as well. So they actually get that type of opportunity to work in the sector as well they're looking to go into. That doesn't mean they're necessarily wanting to go off into universities. And I think actually giving a free choice to young people to decide what they want to do with their futures is a really good thing. And that's why I'm a really big advocate of what the Studio School is doing. And it's part of a multi-academy trust. And actually quite a lot of the schools in Bath are multi-academy as well. You've got the Bath Education Trust, which does Beech and Cliff, Hayesfield, Oldfield, etc., and they provide some of the best quality schools anywhere. But we can always do better. That that narrative, which when my mum was a teaching assistant, she remember coming back from the school and the head teacher said, well, what do you expect with kids like these? I'm sorry, that's got to be ended, and it's got to be ended by hard graft and passion of the teaching professionals. And I really want to work incredibly hard to ensure that we do end up with schools in the top 100 in Bath, and I think that's not an unachievable goal. I think that's a really good opportunity in the future too.
Lovely. We will take a question from Twitter, and I should say you can tweet in questions at #BathDecides if you're not so inclined to speak from the floor. So Ben, would you push for higher maintenance loans, a big limiting factor on students, especially with the high cost of living in Bath?
I say any time that a politician decides to promise something that they haven't costed and thought about the actual figures, to be frank, is a wrong decision. I would like to go away and actually look at the facts on this and work out whether or not actually we need to be reforming the maintenance loan system, and whether or not we actually need to increase it as well. And I have to say, I'd probably sit more on the side of yes, we do need to increase them, because we've obviously looked quite heavily at the tuition fee side of things, and this sort of £6,000, £9,000 is sort of the tip of the iceberg, really. The big problem is that in a city like Bath, the third least affordable city anywhere in the UK, students are being put off on the basis that it's costing so much for them to live here in the city. So we need to be doing so much more. And I say this as someone who had a brother at King's College University in London as a med student, and he ended up being absolutely ripped off, basically, in a way, because he ended up accumulating huge amounts of debts as a result of the high cost of living in London, and Bath is getting to that stage as well. So if we can work with the Universities Minister, there's no current plans in the Conservatives manifesto anyway that I've seen, although I'd like to see something announced on this going forwards. You know, my door is always open, and I think it's really important that we do look at the facts and the figures to work out whether or not it is actually affordable before I start promising, you know, yes, you can have an extra 10% of your maintenance allowance, because I don't know the actual answer to that, and we've got to find money from somewhere in order to pay for it.
Great. Questions from the floor? So we will go grey blazer near the front, and then check shirt in the middle.
First of all, thank you. I thought it was very interesting. Moving away from local and domestic issues very briefly, can I ask what either you or your party's view is on the largest security challenge facing Britain at this time? Thank you.
Absolutely. Britain has never faced a more insecure world. I think that's incredibly important to say, and anybody that is going to put at risk Britain's security really needs a good answer as to the reasons why. And I was debating the other day at there was a schools conference on climate change. And the thing that I found incredibly alarming was the number of people who turned around at that event and didn't quite know what a nuclear deterrent meant. And why on earth would you want to go off and spend £300 million or whatever it is on Trident when we're never going to actually push the button? Well, that is the point of a nuclear deterrent. And you can ask that question next week to Steve Bradley himself, because he didn't quite get that. So we need to be putting our international and national security at the very forefront, and it's certainly something that I've been saying an awful lot in Bath terms. I brought the Foreign Secretary to a defence company in Bath called BMT, and the council at the moment is offering the same site for its expansion to two different parties, and obviously caused a huge amount of mess around it. So of course the Foreign Secretary is thinking, hold on, this company in Bath terms is currently supplying all the defence equipment to improve land-based defence systems over in the Baltic nations. Now, if to be frank, the council doesn't end up getting its act together, then this isn't just a Bath-based problem, this is a national security-based problem. And we've got to be making sure that we make this a very serious point, that if we want to maximise our security with the Russian bear being untamable and uncontrollable over on the Eastern Front, and I got in a lot of trouble when I said Eastern Front a couple of weeks ago, but it is definitely a concern over there. We can't even get a battalion together in the space of 2 weeks in order to defend land-based invasion over on the east. And it is starting to get to a point, as we had in the early days of the Cold War, where this is actually a really big concerning problem. And I don't think any of the nations in Europe have actually realised this, and I think they should be taking an example out of Britain's book in terms of its international leadership on this. Sanctions aren't working quite clearly, and I think there is a really important need to make sure we maximise our military and maximise our military spending, and also the deterrents that are available to us to ensure that we do protect you guys, because that's ultimately what a government is there for.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Ben, for taking the time to do a second Hustings. So the European Union, our membership is a big issue for me. And actually I agree sort of with the official Tory party line that we need to renegotiate, having done my placement there and seen the inefficiency. And I also agree that we need a referendum because just for democracy, because no one under the age of 58 has had a vote on it. I think that's quite important. However, a big however, I'm concerned about the increase in like Eurosceptic voices in the Conservative Party, the backbenchers, as well as the leadership sort of pandering to UKIP. So my question to you is, how would you vote if and when there is a referendum? And would you describe yourself more as a Peter Bone or a Kenneth Clarke?
God, what a horrible comparison. It's the in, out or shake it all about type argument on this one, I'm afraid. I think everyone's sort of left to one side we will not make any reforms at all. And I think all political parties are basically saying that we want a reform system. I'm slightly unsure about the Lib Dems, but I don't quite know what their position is at the moment. So what we need to be doing is being completely upfront with the public and saying to you guys what we're actually going to start to reform. Because to be frank, the only two things that I know about at the moment as a parliamentary candidate is the fact that the European nations are quite happy with the fact that we wanted to bring our welfare system in line with the rest of the European Union, to stop us dangling a big fat carrot in front of every single European worker saying, come over to Britain, it's absolutely fine. You know, you'll get benefits from effectively day one, and they're obviously wanting to keep hold of their own workforce over in their own countries. If I decided to go over to Italy tomorrow, then I'd have to pay into the system for 4 years. So I don't think it's unreasonable in a fair way to say to the European Union, we want to reform our treaty with them to bring our welfare system in line with them as well. And that actually got a lot of backing. The thing that didn't get any backing was, funnily enough, when some in the Conservative Party were trying to pander to UKIP. The thing that ended up not working was when we decided to say that we would introduce caps on free movement of labour, a founding principle of the European Union. It wouldn't have worked because no one would have voted for it. So there's absolutely no point in flogging a dead horse. Let's actually get around the negotiating table and hammer out some deals with our friends in Europe in order to actually reform the system in our interests. And I think that's a really good example of how we can reform the system. The other one, obviously, is making sure that national parliaments have more say over decision making. That will be a tricky one, but there are an awful lot of other countries around the rest of Europe that are thinking along the same lines as well. The other points, however, I simply don't know. And the Prime Minister hasn't laid them out clearly enough in my mind. I'd rather stab him in the eye than in the back and say to him to his face that actually you need to be you need to be telling people what you're going to be reforming before you actually introduce a referendum. And I'd like him to do that before the general election, so that you actually know what we're going to be reforming if we do end up taking control of the government and introducing a referendum in 2017. But if you are wanting a referendum on the European Union, the only party that will actually be able to deliver it is the Conservative Party. The other parties simply are not going to agree with it. Look at their examples of what they've been doing in the House of Lords. Liberal Democrats and Labour Lords have ended up blocking any type of reform within the European, they have blocked any type of legislation that any Conservative MP has ended up pushing. And it's really, really difficult in order to get that through the House of Lords, because simply we don't have enough power in the House of Commons at the moment in order to secure that, because we're in a coalition.
I don't think you've answered my question though. Like, how would you vote? Say there isn't a negotiation. Say you don't vote at all. There's only partial. How would you vote in a referendum? Like, I don't understand whether you're a Eurosceptic or you're a pro-European.
These sort of polarised blocks I don't necessarily agree with, to be honest with you. I'm quite a pragmatic sort of person when it comes to the European Union. In terms of a direct answer to your question then, I would want a reformed package. If the reforms go through in the way that actually is in Britain's interest, I'll vote for. If we don't get any of the reforms that we want, then I'll vote to leave.
Okay, questions from the floor. We will take black jumper just over there, and then blue hoodie just there.
I read an article recently in The Independent about a lobbying group pro-fox hunting, and apparently that they're meant to be canvassing for your support for them. What do you think about that?
Well, in terms of the hunting bill itself and my position on it, I'm quite clear that the hunting bill doesn't work. It's not in the interests of anybody at the moment. I don't like flogging a dead horse, and that the Hunting Act simply isn't working, and if a law isn't working, it needs to be reformed. So what I've said is that I will back a free vote on the repeal of the hunting bill, but I would like it to be replaced with something else. I'm still weighing up both sides of the argument to work out what is in the interests of both the communities that have been affected by this bill and also in the interests of animal welfare. And holding my hands, I'm a pretty big conservationist, I have to admit, and I've done an awful lot of work over the years on environmental issues, and it's a very, very complicated, difficult subject. And if I do become the MP here, I'm going to have to weigh up both sides of the argument to work out what we actually do. Could it be potentially a system of licensing, which was already called for back in the day? Could it be an outright ban? I think the debate needs to be held, and I'm not wanting this to be just like a 1 or 2 day debate. You know, if you read Tony Blair's memoirs, he said his biggest regret was the hunting bill. He didn't understand the impact this would actually have on the community. This is not an easy answer, and any sort of moral issue or a free vote issue is never going to be an easy answer, and I think it's wise for any MP to end up consulting widely with the people of Bath before they actually do make their final decision on that issue.
Just to follow you up on that, Ben, you said how the bill doesn't work. Could you explain how and possible alternatives which you might advocate?
Well, I've already talked about the potential avenues you want to look at. I mean, for example, licensing is something that they had originally called on, Vote OK had originally called on back in sort of 2003 when the initial bill came through. But in terms of how it's not working,
yes.
Well, we clearly know, because the RSPCA has been going out and filming hunters, that they are currently they're currently abusing the system. So if a law is not working, then it needs to be looked at and it needs to be reformed. I'm not someone that's going to just turn around and say, no, I'm not going to repeal this thing. I mean, it's like drugs law, for example. We know that drugs laws aren't working at the moment, and no doubt there'll be questions on this later on. Why shouldn't we actually have the debate? Why shouldn't we look at the interests of the people that it's affecting and actually talk about how we end up actually making sure that the law does actually work in the interests of all communities involved?
Great. Questions from the floor? Oh no, wait, we've still got a mic floating around for a question, don't we?
Yeah. This question is more about civil liberties. Recently, the Lib Dems in coalition, as far as I know, vetoed a ban on extremist speakers in universities. And in light of that, or the recent attacks on the freedom of speech across Europe and beyond Europe as well, what is your opinion? How would you ensure that none of these civil liberties will be violated, essentially, especially in the context of counter-terrorism bills and things like that?
It's a really difficult balancing act to be had between civil liberties on one side and protection of the realm on the other. And there is a very, very fine line between the two. And for me, I don't know whether or not I'd actually have backed the Liberal Democrats on that particular veto, I have to say, because weighing up both sides of the argument, I thought that there was enough protections involved that, you know, this is about stopping radicalisation. It's not about sort of stopping someone coming in and saying what they think. You know, if someone is saying something that's going to end up harming someone else, then we need to be legislating to protect the public on that, I have to say. But I think sometimes there are pieces of legislation, particularly this argument with the Home Office. The Home Office sort of keeps thumping the drum and say, no, we need greater protections, and every time that something goes wrong in the world, we need a new law. I don't think necessarily a new law every time is the right answer, and we need to have a much wider debate over, you know, how do we balance in a new international complex world what the balancing line is, because I don't think we're in new territory, I have to say, and we're talking about the international security problems that are going on around the rest of the world at the moment. And I don't think anybody has really sort of realised that, you know, over the next sort of 30 years, and, you know, if I'm lucky enough to become your MP, then if I'm an MP for as long as Don has been, then I don't want it to be sort of turning into sort of like a North Korean dictatorship over the space of time that I'm the MP for Bath. I do want to make sure that both sides are balanced, and the government sometimes does get it wrong, and that's why, as an MP, and I'll be a backbench MP, my job is really to hold the government to account, to make sure that the interests of the individual are protected against the interests of the government.
Great, questions? We will go to grey jumper near the back and
there's a lot of grey today.
Black t-shirt just down the front.
It's like John Major's cabinet.
You don't seem to... you don't seem to agree with your party on much. So, all the stuff you're saying, how have we got any idea, or would you be able to actually make a difference?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very difficult as a backbench MP sometimes to end up making a huge amount of difference. The amount of time to table a private member's bill, for example, for those of you, you've probably all watched the Inside Parliament documentary on BBC Two over the last few weeks. You know how much time is actually spent on backbench amendments and how difficult it is for backbenchers to reform pieces of legislation as individuals. But if you work as a collective, then there are many ways that you can end up actually achieving your aims. I mean, don't get me wrong, on things like the big national issues like the economy, I'm a fond advocate of what the government has been doing in terms of getting ourselves back on track with its long-term economic plan. For those of you watching the budget the other day, you're probably playing long-term economic plan bingo, but we have got it right on many things in terms of the economy, on welfare reform. One of the reasons why I got involved in the Conservative Party was because people like my mum weren't getting the support that they needed as someone who was disabled, whereas I was on my minimum wage job having to pay pretty high taxes in order to pay for the person living next door to me to live a life on benefits, and I thought that was wrong, and I thought that was immoral for a government to allow that sort of constant spiral of decline and that welfare trap to exist. Even when the economy was growing, we still had 1.5 million people at any one stage solely reliant on the state, and that's not what Anaya Bevan came up with as an idea for welfare. It wasn't there to be a handout, it was there supposed to be a hand up, and I appreciate the fact I'm sounding quite socialist here when I say that, but it's actually a really important point that there are people in the Conservative Party, like myself, who will be willing to defend that. And on things like the NHS, which is obviously a big issue as well, I do believe that the best way of reforming the NHS is by giving power to doctors and medical professionals who will actually make the decisions far better than some bureaucrat somewhere in an office that's never practiced a day of medicine in their entire lives. So, there are many things that I agree with the Conservative Party on, but there are things which I will take an independent mind on and take an independent line on. And I'm not here just to toe the party line all the time. I'm here to represent the people of Bath. You are my boss at the end of the day. And if I became your MP, that's exactly what I intend to do.
I was very interested by your perspective on freedom of speech. I've got a slightly similar question on the matter of privacy. I want to know what your opinion is on the Data Communications Act, which would require internet service providers to start storing records of our online activities.
Indeed. I think there's been a lot of sort of hyperbole around this particular bill in that I received a lot of emails on this, I have to admit, and hats off to organisations like 38 Degrees. And if you're not a member of 38 Degrees, I would significantly ask you to go and have a look at that particular campaigning organisation, because they do literally barrage me with emails, and sometimes MPs do stick their necks on the line and say, oh, actually, I kind of listened to what they're saying here. But on this particular issue, I thought there was a lot of hyperbole around this, in that the government would be reading all your emails, they'll see what sort of messages you've sent on Tinder or whatever. And to be frank, that's not what the bill was going to do. It was supposed to be there really to keep a record, to make sure that public protection and the police's job of dealing with radicalisation and dealing with extremism was improved. I'm not going to say that everything was absolutely right about that bill, no, but I have to say I do kind of often look through the sort of the headlines that you see in the sort of Daily Mails of this world and actually look at the lines and the detail of the actual bill itself, and I thought there were enough protections for individuals in that bill itself.
Great. So some more questions. We will go white t-shirt down the front and then khaki coat just in front of me.
Where is Los Polos?
It's Breaking Bad. Last election, the Conservatives campaigned on the idea of a big society, where local people and civil society would help in the running of the country and of local communities. Do you think this has been a successful policy over the past 5 years?
Yes, good question on that one. I see on a daily basis charities that do amazing work across the whole of Bath. You probably might not be aware of this, but for example, there's a charity called the Trauma Recovery Centre on the Lower Bristol Road, and they're dealing with human trafficking as an issue. And in Bath, we have this sort of impression that, you know, it's a beautiful place and it's a World Heritage City, etc. But on the other side of the coin, in the places where I'm out door knocking, the places where I'm actually dealing with an awful lot of casework, these issues are happening. And we don't like to talk about it. And the people that are helping those communities aren't getting the praise that they deserve. And I spent an awful lot of time working with them, organisations like Mentoring Plus, the Trauma Recovery Centre, First Steps at Children's Centre in Twerton, which is one of the most deprived communities anywhere in the southwest, and helping them and cheerlead for them and actually say thank you for all the work that you're doing, because they don't often get a lot of praise. You know, the fact that there's an opportunity to take the Trauma Recovery Centre down to meet Samantha Cameron and the Friends of the RUH to meet the Prime Minister at Downing Street. They were like, wow, this is really great. You know, thank you so much for giving us some coverage and actually telling people in Bath what they're all about. And funnily enough, their fundraising ended up increasing as a result of actually giving them some coverage. So the big society is happening all around us all the time. I actually quite like the fact that big society gave quite a lot of coverage to what people are doing on a day-to-day basis. A lot of people say it was a rebranding for what people are already delivering. But actually, I thought it was a really good opportunity to cheerlead the voluntary sector and say, look, you are doing great things. Thank you so much for the work that you are doing, and keep on doing it, because without people like them, there will be a lot more poverty and a lot more deprivation in places like Bath going forward.
What is the Conservative Party's policy on the euthanasia?
There is no Conservative Party policy on euthanasia, okay? It'll be a free vote issue, so it'll be up to the individual conscience of individual MPs to decide what they want to do. This is an issue that's touched my heart quite recently because of my own grandmother's situation. She had 8 years worth of strokes and had dementia as well. And I watched a woman who was a matriarch of a lady, sort of ended up being moved from bed to chair, chair to bed, and she was in a lot of discomfort, to be honest with you. I'll hold up my hands. I'm a Christian myself, and I have quite a lot of difficulties balancing what I saw with my grandmother's own circumstances with my own moral perspective on things. So I have to say, I'm changing my mind on this one, given circumstances recently affecting my own family. And looking at things like the assisted dying bill, for example, that Lord Faulkner has been pushing through the House of Lords, I think that takes, there's a lot of merit in that argument. And I'm quite forensic when it comes to legislation, and I go through line by line, working out where caveats could end up being looked at and closing loopholes in particular pieces of legislation. And I've done all of that. You can find it on my website. If you go to the assisted dying bill section, you'll find, without me boring you to tears with sort of every line by line sort of reasons why I'd like to see amendments drafted when it does hit the House of Commons, because it's in the House of Lords at the moment. Then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have once you've had a read through it. All right?
But, sorry, would you support you would support it with the amendments?
I would support it with the amendments, yeah.
Lovely. As we have lots of hands and not much time, we'll try and keep the answers as brief as possible, Ben. So hands
I'll try,
up.
I can't promise.
We'll have a white T-shirt in the middle, and then the striped T-shirt just in the aisle.
Hello. Given the re-election of Netanyahu in Israel, would you support work towards a Palestinian state, and if so, how?
Yeah, there's a big irony in terms of what the government says on Palestine, in that it says in one breath that it's looking for a two-state solution, but then won't recognise one of the states as a state. So you can't really apply a two-state solution to 1.5 states. It doesn't work. So there's a lot of merit on what is being said about pushing for state recognition of Palestine, okay? But I'm not going to start to turn around and be someone that's going to take one side over the other, because, to be frank, we've seen some problems in the rest of the world where if you take one side over the other, you end up actually making things a lot worse. Britain has a checkered history when it comes to the Middle East, and the idea of the British government wading in with its size 12s and deciding that it's going to solve the problems in Israel and Palestine, I think will be counterproductive. And I'd like to see an awful lot more work done at the UN level in order to provide a solution to that particular problem. At a very local level, there's a battle going on between the Foreign Office and the Home Office at the moment on the Bath-Bethlehem Bath-Bethlehem trade links, and that there's the Chamber of Commerce in Bethlehem that has been refused access to the UK, and I'm currently working with the Foreign Office at the moment and the Middle East Minister in order to actually get their visas approved, and I will do all I can in order to make sure that we ensure that Bath ends up benefiting out of that particular trade link. But it's not easy enough to end up answering in the space of 1 minute, I'm afraid. It's going to be something that you're more than welcome to email me on, and I will set out my entire diplomatic plan for the Israel-Palestine confrontation. And trust me, it's quite long.
Hi Ben, thanks for coming. I've got to ask you about yesterday's budget. So the 20p tax rate went up in line with inflation. The higher tax rate for the middle classes had an above inflation tax cut. But the Chinese got a £130 million tax cut from the North Sea oil. In terms of delivering cuts to those who need it, do you think that yesterday's budget was really fairness for those hard-working Britons?
Well, there's an awful lot of people who are in Scotland and the north of England who rely on the North Sea oil industry, and with global prices being so difficult at the moment, there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that we secure jobs in that particular industry. For me, I thought the budget was a very good budget, actually. It was very safe. It didn't actually come up with any sort of big giveaways or anything like that, and I think the public would be able to look straight through any sort of big bumper giveaway just before an election. I'd rather steady as she goes as an economic message going into a general election. I have to say, I'm incredibly proud of the record of this government in lifting the poorest in society out of tax altogether. And the increase in the thresholds is something that I would be very much happy to back going forwards. I would like to see long-term things like national insurance and income tax being merged together. That's a very radical plan, I have to admit, but as you could see, the starting blocks of that has already started to be created with reductions in Class 2 national insurance contributions, for example, for businesses. So there's a lot to be done in terms of making our tax system a lot more progressive and a lot fairer, but we are working and legislating to stop tax avoidance and evasion, and we've actually been leading the international picture on that as well, because, you know, my other half is currently, he's over in Dublin, and he lives in the Google district. Well, lo and behold, what did they end up doing? They moved from Britain over to Dublin because they've got a cheaper tax rate. So you have to work on an international scale on this issue, because all we end up doing is losing out the tax revenues we would have ended up keeping if we hadn't have actually worked with those companies in the first place. And that obviously would have had a huge detriment on jobs.
Okay, some more questions. We'll take the orange jumper in the aisle, and then the nice printed jumper just up there.
Do love a good printed jumper.
I'll get straight to the point. Our drugs policy seems like a colossal waste of money. In Colorado, for example, they've legalised it and they're now giving money back to taxpayers because they get so much from it. We've obviously had stuff in the media in the past few weeks. Do you support any kind of decriminalisation or, dare I say, legalisation?
The whole point of drugs laws is really to stop people getting on drugs, and as we've seen, you know, and reducing substance misuse, to be frank. And I say this, you know, someone who's worked with the NHS. We want to make sure that drugs levels do reduce. The Conservative Party line is that they want to keep criminalisation of drugs policy. I think we need to have another open debate over the subject. I know there's an awful lot of members of my own party, backbenchers largely, because they obviously can't say that in the government, but we would be open to debating reform of the system. And if that meant decriminalisation or a system of licensing, then I'd be open to actually having that discussion. And if you have an interest in it, then for goodness sakes get in touch with me about it, and I'm happy to sort of have that conversation with other MPs if I do become the MP for Bath.
If elected, the Conservatives have pledged to withdraw Labour's 1998 Human Rights Act, which human rights activists argue is at best incoherent, but at worst is effectively a blank cheque to Parliament to infringe, for example, prisoners' rights in the UK. Is this an issue on which you toe the party line on? How can you defend this decision?
That is something I toe the party line on, I have to admit. I'm actually quite a fond advocate of the Human Rights Act being withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights and having a British Bill of Rights. That doesn't mean that we would end up removing ourselves out of any of the chapters. It would still be in agreement with a lot of what the European Convention has been saying, I have to say, because we were one of the founding countries to put that case together. But I'm a fond advocate of British parliamentary sovereignty, and I can see that the European Convention on Human Rights hasn't been working for quite a long period of time, and the court system at the moment, we had the Secretary of State for Justice in Bath earlier on today. Funnily enough, that conversation came up at a round table with some lawyers as well, and it was quite clear that the bureaucratic mess of a system that seems to be created over in Europe is impacting upon proper, swift justice in the UK. And in answer to your question on prisoner votes, I'm going to be quintessential here and say, look, I don't want prisoners to have the vote. I have to say that. I don't think that's fair. When you commit a crime and you go to prison, you should lose those rights. And I think I completely agree with the Prime Minister and what he said on that as well.
Okay, any more questions? So we will go just down at the front over here, and then back to the Christmas jumper at the top.
Okay, thanks for coming. I'm not a politics student. I'm studying computer science, actually. But last week, I happened to watch a documentary about an idiot guide to politics. And it mainly is about, it's not rare cases that MPs and PMs broke their promises after elected. So it's like they get people out to vote and lie. So I think it's probably one of the reasons why the rate of young people voting is still decreasing. And there's a still petition going on that make lying in Parliament illegal. And so if someone were to lie in court of law, he will be put in jail. So how do you think do you think it is legal to lie in Parliament? And how you and your party will push it forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fond advocate of something called the Real Recall Bill, which Zach Goldsmith was pushing. And there was a big battle going on between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats within the coalition, in that the Conservatives wanted residents to be able to hold their MPs to account if we did something dodgy, or if they did something dodgy during the middle of a parliamentary session. There's nothing that you can do in order to get rid of them halfway through. So they wanted to reform that system. The Liberal Democrat side said that no, they want only MPs to hold other MPs to account, which, call me an old-fashioned Democrat, I don't think it's actually a good, accountable democratic system. So we are getting there on that journey. I've already pledged my allegiance to Zach, and I'm happy to carry on with the campaign, pending the outcome of the general election, obviously. But right to recall and real recall is a really important way of improving accountability during a fixed-term 5-year parliament. In relation to lying in Parliament, of course, nobody wants to hear a liar in Parliament. However, Parliament is there to have a free debate, a free discussion. And when I'm trying to caveat myself here in case I end up making the unavoidable situation where I might end up missaying something in the House of Commons. Everyone's human. And to end up having the law infringing the ability for free debate in the House of Commons on the basis that, yes, you should be locked up if you lie. Well, everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes, but I don't think introducing a law to curtail the freedom of speech in the House of Commons is the right thing to do in my mind.
Where do you personally stand on combating the causes of anthropogenic climate change?
Crikey, that's a good question for you. 9:30 at night. In all honesty with you, I don't know. I mean, I can talk to you genuinely about my views on climate change, and I am not someone that is a denier of climate change. I'm a long-standing campaigner against air pollution levels, and I've seen for myself, I've gone out and swum with whale sharks, for example, myself, and saw the impact that acidification of the oceans is having on some of the rarest species in the oceans, and we need to be doing an awful lot more as a government to end up protecting our marine environments, but also tackling climate change head on. I think that the best way of doing that is working at an international, supranational level, and the UK government is working and leading in on that at the moment too. Now, if we take control of the government, we at the moment haven't had for the last 5 years a Secretary of State for for energy and climate change, and whoever is in charge of energy and climate change needs to put absolutely concretely together a plan of how we end up tackling things like air pollution at a national level, and also tackling climate change at more of an international level as well. And I hope whoever does take control, they take a lead on that too.
Lovely. We'll take one question from Twitter before a few final floor questions. Seemingly appropriate, having alluded to Zach Goldsmith. Ben, as a backbench MP, what would be the first issue you would table a private member's bill on?
This is when you'll end up annoying the whips, in all honesty with you. I'm one of the few people, I have to say, because my own party knows that I tend to be a free thinker, to actually have already been assigned a whip as well. So this is the one where they sort of end up giving you a load of things to say, right, okay, you need to table amendment, you need to table a private member's bill on that. And to be honest with you, one of the first things that I would like to personally see, if of course the real recall bill isn't enshrined in legislation, is actually pushing for that, and hopefully I'll be able to work with Zach on that as one of the first things that I do. There are a load of different ones that I want to end up putting forwards, everything from education policy right the way through to reforming our NHS as well, and reforming it in a way that actually puts patients first, for example. And there's a lot of things you can be doing, working on a cross-party basis as a backbench MP, and getting quite a lot of respect across the entire floor of the House of Commons on that basis too.
Brilliant, thank you. So we'll have time for a few more questions. So we will go to the checkered shirt just in front of me and the black cardigan just there.
Hi. So you said in your opening remarks that you were really pro equality and that that's something you've worked on. Mm-hmm. So I look at Westminster and I see a lot of white middle-class men, and I think a lot of other people do too, and perhaps feel that's not very representative of Britain today. Mm-hmm. So how would you work with the Conservatives particularly to kind of combat that? Yeah,
I'm really glad you asked that question actually, because this is a big problem, particularly in the Conservative Party and particularly in the Liberal Democrats Party. It's not so much an issue in the Labour Party because they're able to get bursaries together from unions in order to help candidates from disadvantaged backgrounds to become MPs. The difficult thing is we're never going to have a situation where we end up with more people from working class, sorry, I sound very generalistic here, but working class backgrounds becoming MPs because they need private money in order to get them through to become an MP. Now, I don't own my own house, okay? I'm currently eating into my own housing deposit savings in order to fund my ability to live on a day-to-day basis whilst I'm running an election campaign. And there's an awful lot of people that are completely turned off with the idea of getting involved in politics because of that very reason. So I think it's actually an important thing we need to talk about, which is how do we encourage people from other backgrounds to get involved in and become MPs in the future. And I'd really like to sort of spearhead that within the Conservative Party myself. And I sort of touched upon it when I was running to be when I was national chairman of the youth wing of the Conservative Party. On other more general equality points, I was a fond advocate of the same-sex marriage bill, and I was working with people like Nick Herbert, who was in charge of spearheading that campaign through the House of Commons, and there was a huge number of Conservative MPs that ended up backing that bill. And we had a huge number of young members of the Conservative Party, Bath University being one of them, by the way, as the society, who backed the same-sex marriage bill as well. And I'm quite proud of that, and I'm quite pleased with that as well. And it actually shows that we're able to turn around to people and say, look, we're not the old fuddy-duddy Tory party that most of you probably think we are, but we're actually driving forward a real conservative message, which is equality of opportunity. And we shouldn't shy away from actually championing that agenda. And that will be sort of my general overtones if I become the MP here.
Kind of following on from that, in your opening remark, you also talked about women and breaking the glass ceiling, as it were. So what's obviously your and your party's view on that? Also, kind of more particularly on maternity and paternity pay.
Indeed. I will not change my mind. I will not take a different approach to the government on maternity and paternity pay. I think the reforms that have been made are actually in the interests of dads in particular, who are looking to stay at home and raise their children if they want to. I think that's a good future move. In terms of my own background, in terms of helping women break the glass ceiling, for example, one thing that I found when I took the leadership of the youth wing of the party, and there was 23,000 members, was that you would stand in front of a room. There's some people in this room that know exactly what I'm talking about because they were there on those first couple of years. And you would see a load of blokes who were not exactly women-friendly as such, in inverted commas. And we spent a long time sort of trying to turn that around and make ourselves look a lot more representative and encourage people from other non-traditional looking conservative backgrounds to get involved. And I set up with the lady who wanted to organise something called Conservative Future Women, which was really an organisation that's still there, by the way. It's the first time it was ever created to encourage to support women who are wanting to get involved in politics at a young level, to help break the glass ceiling through. A number of different conferences were ending up being set up by people like Karen Brady, for example. She would sort of come along to the conferences and sort of explain about her story and how she could motivate people. And from that day forwards, I saw that there's a really good opportunity. I mean, you said you were a computer science student. If you go to Bath City College, I was down there the other day, at their computer science lesson, there was one lady who was doing an apprenticeship out of 20. And what I'm helping her to do is to go into different schools and say, look, this is a really good opportunity for women to get involved in apprenticeships as well. This isn't sort of a man's game as such, which seems to be sort of like the inherent stereotype with apprenticeships at the moment. But say, actually, there are many opportunities available. You have got this. Look at what my case is as a young woman myself looking to go into computer science. So it's loads of different ways that you can help to reform that, but I'm afraid it's going to take a very long period of time before we don't have to look at whether or not you're gay, straight, black, white, male, female, to actually put all those things aside to look at them as individuals. And I'll do all I can in order to help achieve that goal.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Ben. That is our time up. So if we could have a round of applause for Ben Howlett, please. And a couple of things to remember. We have our final hustings next week with Steve Bradley, Liberal Democrat candidate for Bath. Should be very interesting. Lots of promises to ask him about. And finally, the big debate between all 5 main candidates for Bath and the independent candidate who is running for Bath, taking place on the 16th of April at 7. But thank you all for staying out so late, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Cool.